710 KURV Talkback. Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Aaron microphone. Streaming live on KURV.com, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK. We're here to educate and to instruct. We are not here preaching to the choir. We are here teaching the choir how to sing. The problem with those on our side, which is the side of rational thought, which is never or rarely heard in the media, is that our side, what is our side, constitutionalists, seem to have trouble enunciating their view. And usually it's because they're Republican politicians who are unprincipled. And if you're not principled, then how can you enunciate a view that you really don't believe in? Most of what you hear in the media, you turn on the bobbleheads that are on TV, radio, and all this other stuff, and the bread and circus, such as reality shows and other programs, which fill the airways full of tripe and nonsense, are simply there to distract you from what's really going on, and that is the theft of your rights by our government. And so to distract you from reality, they create this matrix environment which is not real at all. So every issue that is on these news programs, that is presented in universities and documentaries and everything else, every single issue is off-center. Every single issue, the discussion misses the point entirely. And that's not accidental. And you can bring up, what do you want to talk about? We can talk about anything. Let's talk about immigration. The big deal about illegal immigration. What is illegal immigration? Well, illegal immigration is nothing other than the country's borders being crossed against the laws by individuals who are not members of that country, not citizens of the country, and doing so in a non-legal fashion. In this, today, the illegal aliens are basically from Mexico, because it's a contiguous country, and places south of that. But they are not the only non-documented individuals that have come to this country. Now, back in between 1880 and 1920, about 20-some million Europeans came to the United States. It was pretty much an open border at that time. There was some processing, but there really wasn't any restrictions, not until 1920 or so, when Woodrow Wilson and his eugenic acolytes decided that people from Europe did not have the same sufficient genetic structure to allow them to be with the exalted Anglo-Saxons of northeastern Boston, Washington, D.C., and New York. And they cut off immigration to pretty much all from Europe. Much harder to get to Europe, from Europe to the United States than it is from Mexico to the United States. However, the enmity of the native-born American towards the immigrant is not just confined to those of Spanish-speaking origin. They also manifested itself, those from Ireland, in those from Eastern Europe, Jews and others from Eastern Europe, Slavs, the same kind of thing. Nothing new there. And of course, now all of those that came in 1880 to 1920 are the nativists, and who are opposed to those coming in from Mexico. Now, what is the reason to have a closed border? Are there any legitimate reasons to a closed border? Well, only to prevent those who wish to do violence and harm. Is there any reason to have a closed border? Other than that, there is no reason. What is the actual problem here? Is the problem individuals coming to the United States who are not documented according to the laws of the United States. Is that the real problem? Does anybody really care if their neighbor has documentation or not? Who even thinks about that? Do you ever sit around thinking about whether your neighbor has the proper documentation? Who cares, really? What is the real issue here? Well, the real issue is the welfare state. The real issue is you have the welfare state characterized by the public school system, public access health care, and other services provided through taxpayer expense, which are accessible to all those who pay taxes and for those who don't pay taxes. Fact of the matter is that most individuals that send their children to public school do not pay taxes. And most individuals who use public libraries do not pay taxes. That most individuals, obviously, who are on food stamps and other forms of welfare do not pay taxes. Many of these facilities, public schools, healthcare, public libraries, public parks, public roads, are accessed by those who do not pay taxes and by those who are not legally documented. So it is the cost. It is the cost of the undocumented citizen that is a real problem. It is the cost in many ways. One is the cost in that they don't pay their fair share of taxes, but on the other hand, many native or citizens of the United States do not pay their fair share of taxes either. They prefer other people to pay taxes. They prefer to be on welfare. Obviously, there are many more American citizens on welfare than undocumented citizens on welfare. It is the welfare system that is the crux of the issue. You want to eliminate the immigration problem, you eliminate welfare. But government is not going to eliminate welfare because welfare is what makes people dependent upon government. Government spends most of its time creating an environment that requires that a significant, if not majority, of the population is dependent upon the government. Now, we're not just talking about poor people. We're not talking about the poor people on food stamps, the poor people on Medicaid, the poor people sending their kids to public schools. Because all those monies do not stay in the hands of the poor. The money spent on public schools, they don't go to poor people. The money spent on health care for the poor do not stay with the poor people. The monies for food stamps do not stay with the poor people. Those monies go to the rich people. And so there are ultimately almost all the monies allocated to the poor end up in the hands of the rich who are on, which is welfare. Okay, rich. Most of the monies devoted to welfare end up in the hands of the rich, and the programs are created specifically to do that. Now, how does that work? Well, if you or I want to buy something, a cell phone or health care or whatever, if we want to buy something, we decide what we're going to buy based upon what our needs are and based upon what the costs are and things like that. We make a decision. Those on welfare do not make the decision because they're not directly connected to the cost of the object. They get a cell phone. The government sends the money directly to the cell phone company. Okay, so we don't even know how much money the government is sending for the purchase of a cell phone. Medicaid person goes and gets medications. They don't know what the medications cost. No one knows, seems, what the medication costs because the money goes directly from the government to the pharmaceutical company. So there's no way of, that's access not easily obtained. And so the money goes from the taxpayer to the government and to the rich that are friends, crony, relatives, contributors of the political class. Illegal immigrant is nothing but a pawn in that system. The legal immigrant or a non-documented immigrant is a pawn that is being used by both parties in order to enrich the constituents of their parties. and one way either for votes or money. That's all there is to it. Neither party has a particular interest in fixing the problem, because then that would remove their a way to manipulate the system to benefit their particular constituency. The resolution of the immigrant problem is very simple. First of all, the idea that someone born in Mexico is intrinsically different than someone born in the United States is absurd. The idea that a person with brown skin is somehow intrinsically different than a person with black or white skin is absurd and scientifically unsound. We are much more alike than we are different. And as human beings, we are essentially identical. Regardless of skin color, you have people of all kinds of dispositions. You have good people, you have bad people. Good people and bad people is within every race, within every religion, within every culture. The resolution of the problem is to get away from this identity where we are given or assumed to have qualities or characteristics based upon appearance. This is absolute nonsense. We need to get away from that. But the government doesn't want to get away from that because the government loves creating constituencies. The Hispanic politician wants to create his Hispanic base. The white Southerner wants to keep their base. I mean, everybody wants to keep their base, and the only way to keep their base is by distinguishing between one group and another. So you're going to cater to your base. But the base that we should cater to is that of human beings, that we're all essentially the same. The welfare system is the crux of the problem, not the crossing, not the undocumented crossing of individuals into the United States and then living here. That is not the problem. The problem is the welfare state. The welfare state, if eliminated, would eliminate all of these problems. The only people that would be here would be people who are seeking better opportunities, who are seeking to find a job, and who are willing to work, not those who want to be parasitic off of the welfare state. Free education, free roads, free food, free rent, free health care. Government sets that up. That needs to be eliminated. Anyone who wants to come to the United States and function under our ideology, our purported ideology, because it's no longer the true ideology of the nation. We are no longer a constitutional republic. We are a fascist dictatorship. But those who seek a better life coming to a country that was based upon a constitutional republic, there's no reason they shouldn't be here. The abuse of the American welfare system is far greater by its citizens than by any number of illegal or non-documented citizens. And so the answer to the problem is very, very simple. You just eliminate the welfare program. You eliminate public schools, and public schools have been a complete disaster. They are inordinately expensive. They produce an uneducated group of individuals. It is a complete waste of time. And the public school system exists primarily to give teachers a job, and so that they'll vote for big government, and to give money to unions. And the reasons that the public school system exists are to indoctrinate the student to believe that, well, first of all, to make sure they have no skill set, so they'll be dependent upon government. To indoctrinate the student that the government is benevolent, and to provide jobs for teachers on the public dole, then we'll vote for big government, and you see that all the time, and to funnel monies to unions that are big contributors to politicians. And that's the only reason that the public school system exists. Easily eliminated through giving of vouchers to all children. That it makes it easy. Now, of course, if you give vouchers to all children, and that will then they can choose, the parents can choose what school to send their children to, and you will then have a system of private schools, and the individuals will now be able to pick and choose among the private schools the same way we now pick and choose over cell phones, computers, and what kind of hamburger meat to buy. We're allowed to do that now for things like that, but we're not allowed to do that for our system of public education. It makes no sense why we shouldn't be allowed to do that. Allow the parents to decide where their children can go to school. And once that money is available, of course, then the private sector will meet those demands. The same way the private sector meets the demands for cell phones, iPods, televisions, automobiles. When there's a demand, the public sector will always figure out a way to meet those demands more efficiently and with a better product than the government can ever do or hope to do. What does a politician know about automobiles or health care, public education, or anything else? Yet they're the ones who decide on issues of public education, on issues of many other issues as well, for which they have no expertise whatsoever. So that solves your immigration problem very, very simply. And also solves many other problems, because once you get the American people off of welfare, then they will start behaving responsibly. Now, what has welfare done to citizens of the United States? Well, it's made them dependent upon government. The black population in 1950, before the welfare system was brought in by the Democrat Party, in 1950, 80% of all blacks were born with two-parent families in wedlock. Very little criminal activity among blacks, and they were a rising star on the horizon. Now what do we have? Because of the welfare system, then now you can behave irresponsibly, have as many kids as you want. You don't have to pay for health care, don't have to pay for school, don't have to pay for food. In fact, you get rewarded. The government gives you money for having more kids out of wedlock. They give you money only if you're not married. And they give you money for every child that you have. And school is free, health care is free. You get paid your rent and all this other stuff. And you get stipends as well. Tax-free, by the way. To such an extent that to be on welfare is like having a job making $60,000 or $70,000 a year. That's what welfare is. The same criminality and indolence is now occurring with the Spanish-speaking population. Whereas the Spanish-speaking population was a family-oriented group, the American government has been assiduously and tirelessly creating a system to make sure that the Spanish-speaking population remain dependent upon the government. How do they do that? Well, besides welfare, we have things like bilingual education. You want to remain in poverty in the United States? Don't learn English. That's what the government wants. The government wants people to be dependent upon government. Don't learn English, be on welfare, vote for Hinojosa. That is what they want. Government wants to get bigger and stronger, and the best way to do that is to create a population of dependents. Easily solved. Now, if you are a businessman, let's look at this in public education, for example. The average cost for elementary school private education is about $5,000 a year per student, some more, some less. If the private sector is, if the monies are now available for the private sector, I can assure you that that cost will drop, because right now there really isn't enough of a population to warrant a large system of private education. And so the system of private education is basically allocated to the more well-to-do to maximize their profits. But if you're a businessman, and let's say you're a businessman and you make T-shirts, and it costs you $10 to make a T-shirt and you sell it for $11. But what if you could subcontract out making that T-shirt to another factory that did it more efficiently, and it cost you $5 to make that T-shirt, and now you sell for $11, much more profit, yes? What businessman wouldn't do that? Well, every businessman would do that. In fact, they're doing that now. Now, you have a system of public education that costs between $10,000 and $25,000, amazingly enough. For instance, in New Jersey, a public school education costs almost $20,000 a year per student. In Washington, D.C., it's $30,000 a year per student. Think about that for a minute. Private education would cost $5,000 a year or less per student. So if you're a legislature of a state and you're facing all these budgetary issues, and your number one budgetary item is public education, which it is in every single state of the union, accounting for 35 to 40% or more of each state's budget, the single largest item. If you could provide that education for half the cost, would you not do it? Why wouldn't you do it? It doesn't make any business sense, doesn't make any fiscal sense not to, so why wouldn't you do it? Why? Because the government, the legislature of the state, does not want to hand that authority over to the private sector, does not want to have the parent to be in charge of their children's education. The government wants to be in charge of your children's education. The government wants to have control of that money so that it goes to the unions, and it goes to the compliant, and it goes to the ones who indoctrinate. If they gave a voucher of $5,000 per student, saving half the money or even more, which could be used for other things then, that would take, unfortunately, for the government's point of view, that takes away power from the government. So they don't want to do that. Besides, it's not their money either. It's the money they stole from the taxpayers. But where does Barack Obama send his children? Private school. Where did Bill Clinton send his child? Private school. Why do the children of Teamsters and the AFL-CIO, their leadership, why do politicians, why can they send their children to private schools, but the people they supposedly represent cannot do so? And that the government makes sure they cannot do so by stealing so much money from the American people in the form of Medicare, Social Security, and taxes, and property taxes, and sales taxes, and every other kind of tax. So much money stolen from the American people, they cannot afford to send their children to private schools. It's not an accident. It's not an accident. The primary purpose of taxes is not to endow the government with funds. The primary purpose of taxes is to weaken and eliminate independence of the citizen. That is the primary goal of taxation. That is why the government really doesn't care that much how much money they much money they waste. They are much more concerned in how much money they can collect, because they want to take away the independence of the American people by stealing their money. By stealing their money and only giving back part of it if the American people promise to be on their knees to the central government. That is the only reason that is the main reason that the system of taxation exists, is to reduce the independence of the average American, to make sure there can never be another American Revolution, to make sure you have a population of serfs who are enthralled by the Kardashians. And if you've got a voice or don't have a voice, or if you can dance or don't dance, or any of this other nonsense, New Jersey housewives and all this other garbage, or entertainment, which diverts our attentions away from what's really going on in this country, and how our very own government has stolen our patrimony, subverted the Constitution, subverted the intent of the Founding Fathers, and turned us into a nation where 51% of the population is openly parasitic upon the other 49%. And as we all know, 51% is bigger than 49. The destruction of the family is always a goal of government, because the family is a unit that can protect the individual from government oppression. But if our family structure is broken, and our children are born out of wedlock, and are therefore uneducated and poverty-stricken, and look to a life of crime in order to receive the money they want to receive, and then those who live a life of crime are emulated because they drive around in fancy cars and wear fancy clothes and go to fancy restaurants and are surrounded by those of the opposite sex because they are successful. Therefore, they are to be emulated. So that is the way government functions. You can talk about abortion. There's nonsense in this thing. This Planned Parenthood. Former governor, deceased, Ann Richards, a scurrilous person if there ever was one. And on that note, we'll take a break. 7 at KURV, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home there, microphone, back after the short break. We're back. 7 at KURV, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK, streaming live on KURV.com. Where are we destroying the family abortion clinics? Oh, just one quick thing about these abortion clinics. These guys are such a bunch of jerks in Planned Parenthood. You know, I mean, what they said, no, we have to keep abortion of the undelivered infant as an option for women's health. Although how killing babies helps the women, but I don't know, or only they could look at it that way. And so they're saying they want to keep the original deal was you don't want it to be done in back alleys. You want it to be secure procedure done with specialists and professionals and all that in a proper setting. So then the government says, okay, then we're going to guarantee there's a proper setting by require certain standards. And the Planned Parenthood comes out, what? Standards? Are you kidding? We don't want no stinking standards. They're such a bunch of hypocrites. Planned Parenthood is a bunch of useful dupes. Ann Richards' daughter is nothing but a Nazi, as Ann Richards was, a bunch of abortionist Nazis that want to kill children. And that's all they are. So all of you Democrats out there, you're just a bunch of Nazis or a supporter of Nazis. And that includes you, Hillary. So, okay, we got Scott, 7 at KURV. Thanks for calling, Scott. What's up?
Yeah, Dr. Gelman, I have a couple of questions and then a subject I'd like to discuss with you.
Go right ahead.
How's your book coming along? I haven't heard anything about your book lately.
Oh, it's finished. However, I gave it to a publisher, so I'm only going to get a few complimentary issues because they have this crazy idea they might make money on it. I don't think so, but because it's a highly academic study. But so you're a frequent caller, and I'm going to get you. Why don't you leave your address with Joe here, and I'll mail out a copy to you in about a week or so.
Well, I appreciate that, Doctor. And can you do me a favor and autograph it for me, please, sir?
Yes, and I'll use my real name.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yeah, I'll do that. But you have to promise to read it.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I'll absolutely read it.
Okay, what else?
Let me ask you, is this just another part of the government deliberately making, like, the United States Postal Service, which with the amount of business, anybody can figure this out, with the amount of customers they have and the business that they turn, lose billions and billions of dollars each year? Is that just they deliberately do that to have that just falter like that? I can't see, as a businessman, I can't see how you cannot make a substantial amount of profit. Of course, the United States government's not supposed to be in business, but they own the United States Postal Service, and they lose billions and billions and billions of dollars each year, and I don't know how, unless it's really mismanaged.
Well, obviously, it's grossly mismanaged. Now, much of the money that is given to the Postal Service is, in fact, probably most of the money that is spent on the Postal Service by the government is to cover pension plans. there are more postal carriers and postal workers not working than working. So, but that's the exact same situation you have in the public school system, in the police and the fire departments and all of that. This happens to be a federal deal, so that's why the federal government is kind of stuck with that. But that's something that they kind of skirt that issue, that more money is actually being spent on retired postal workers than on workers that are actually delivering mail. But of course, you're right that the government really doesn't care about the money particularly. They just want the power, and it's not their money. In other words, the postal general, whatever they call the guy who runs the post office,
Postmaster General.
Good. I'm glad okay, fine. No money is coming out of his pocket. If you have a restaurant, Scott, you have to pay the salaries, right? And so you're keeping an eye on everything, all the costs and the prices and how much you sell things for. The Postmaster General, he don't care. It's not his money. He's not paying anybody's salary. He's only concerned about his own. And that's the way the government functions. They don't.
Let me ask you: Is there unions tied up in the postal system? My grandfather worked for 42 years in the Bronx in New York.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, is there not a union with the United States postal system for the workers?
Oh yeah, there is. That's why all the money is being. That's where all the money's going.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Between the pensions that they pay out, because I know some of these people are making more money now after 10 years than when they were working for the government.
That's true.
The postal office.
Absolutely.
And the unions, and that's what's eating up all the profit?
Yes, that's eating up more than half the money. Now, you know that you can retire as a postal worker after 20 years and go on a pension, got federal pension, and then go get a job doing something else and still collect your pension. Okay? Like if you get Social Security, you can't do that. If you get Social Security, they take away some of your money if you're working. So that's how crooked our government is. It's just to benefit themselves. Of course, most of the money goes to the union fat cats, with their fancy it's amazing the properties these unions own. These big hotels they own and these junkets they go on to and the private jets that these union officials all have. It's just amazing how much money. That's the whole scheme. The whole scheme is to get money to these union fat cats. So, there is obviously it's a federal union. Scott, you bring up a point, many points, but why is there such a thing as a public union? You ever think about that? Why is there such a thing as a public union? Why do unions exist? If you talk to a union guy, why do unions exist? Unions exist, they say, because the owner, the manufacturer, the guy who owns the plant, cannot be trusted to treat the employee justly. And therefore, it is up to the union to defend the rights of the employee, right? Isn't that what they say? Well, who's the employer of the public worker, of the school teacher, of the postal worker, of the fireman? It's the American taxpayer, right? That's the actual employer. It is not the mayor or the president or the governor. They may run it, but the actual money, the actual employer is the taxpayer. So why are there federal unions? Why? Why are there any public unions? And basically it's saying that the taxpayer, it says that you and I cannot be trusted to treat our employees properly. Okay? That the manager, the governor, or the president cannot be trusted to treat the employee, the federal or the public employee fairly or justly. Now think about that for a second. The union is saying that the governor and the legislature of a state cannot be trusted to treat the public employee justly. But those are the exact same people that are supposed to be running everything else and are represent the rest of us. Doesn't it sound like there's something wrong here? The union is saying you can't trust the governor, you can't trust the senator and congressman. You're saying they can't be trusted, but those are the people that we're trusting to run everything else. And then the very fact that there is a public union means that they accept that as true. The union, right? Isn't that it? The public union hierarchy says that the government cannot be trusted. Isn't that what they're saying? And because they cannot be trusted, they have to have public unions. Well, if they can't be trusted for the public employee, how can they be trusted for anything else?
Well, let me ask you, Doctor, how come my grandfather, he was Postmaster General in New York for 42 years, and he used to say the number one problem in this country were unions, and they're nothing more than organized crime. What do you mean by that?
Well, you know what he meant. I mean, even though he was a union member.
What he meant, but was he right?
Well, of course he's right. I mean, the Teamsters are run by the mafia, as most unions are run by the mafia anyway, just a source of mafia money. You know, when Ronald Reagan was president, most union workers voted for Ronald Reagan. If I want to work for Chrysler, I got to join a union. I may hate unions, right? I may hate unions, and I may find them a bunch of communists, okay? But if I want to work for Chrysler, or I want to work for Ford, or I want to work for General Motors, if I want to work for United Postal Service, I got to join a union. So your grandfather, who may have understood what unions were, but if he wants to be a postal carrier or work for the post office, he has no option but to belong to a union. I mean, that's just the way they have the system contrived in order to maintain their power and authority.
So once again, with the unions, that's why a lot of companies have moved overseas to get away from these unions.
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about the moving of manufacturing overseas. Now, Scott, if you live in the United States, you're an American, I mean, and you have a business, to move overseas, that's a project. You got to deal with their laws, their regulations. You got to go over there and set things up and all of that. Well, why would you? There has to be a reason why people do that. And one major reason, look, why is Toyota the biggest car company in the world now? Because of the United Auto Worker. United Auto Workers Union that made costs so expensive that the Japanese were able to and of course, that union workers, you can't get rid of them. Look at our school teachers. You can't get rid of a union worker. It's impossible. And so you have shoddy products, overpriced products, and the Japanese moved in and killed the American auto industry. What killed the American auto industry? United Auto Workers. Now Toyota now has factories in the United States. They don't want to. They had to because the United States said, either you build factories in the United States or we're going to place an embargo on your automobiles coming from Japan. So don't think that the Japanese were all that interested in having a bunch of American workers build their Japanese cars. But they had to do it because they had excise taxes and other things on imports from overseas. Now, of course, the United States, because the auto workers that work for Toyota and Honda and the Mitsubishi, whatever, they're not unionized. So what does that mean? They produce a better car at less cost. And so it can sell it for a smaller price, a better car. What happened? We got killed, right? We got killed. And the only way we were able to respond was by the American auto companies. They said, well, they had to cut back on the unions. Remember, that's what Reagan kind of implemented. He broke the unions physically and psychologically, drove down union wages, got rid of a lot of their benefits, and then forced them to produce a better product to compete with the people from overseas. But that was against, of course, the union wish. I mean, the unions fought tooth and nail. Why is the railroad industry such a mess in the United States? It's all unionized. That's why we have old rickety trains running on old rickety tracks. We almost had no trains whatsoever. It required it required the breaking of the railroad unions in order to get for the United States to try to compete with foreign countries. But the thing is the fact there's a reason that manufacturing has left our shores, and they want to blame it on greedy owners. That's a bunch of nonsense. It's the greedy unions. Unions destroyed the textile industry of the United States, destroyed by unions. The television electronic manufacturing in the United States destroyed by unions. You know, even like Apple. Does Apple actually manufacture anything in the United States? No. Everything is manufactured in China. Now, everybody considers Apple an American company. Walmart, everybody considers Walmart an American company. Try to find a piece of clothing in Walmart not made overseas. It's impossible. Try to find a computer at Walmart not made overseas. It's impossible. It may have Dell on it. It may have Hewlett-Packard on it. It may have whatever. But,
well, Doctor, you know, a lot of our U.S. cars, to keep the price competitive with the Japanese and foreign cars, they have a lot of their parts like transmissions and bodies made in Mexico and China.
Absolutely.
And assembled.
And assembled here. That's exactly correct. So even so-called American companies, you know, it is such a bunch of nonsense. They talk about American, the stock market, okay? And look at all the companies on the stock market. The Dow Jones average is all-time high. What a bunch of garbage that is. The stock market is nothing but a measure of cronyism between government and big manufacturers. How many jobs does Apple offer Americans? Well, very few, relatively, because everything's being made overseas. And so the thing is so that it's the entire stock market, everything is a lie. If you go to many parts of the United States, the unemployment is very, very high. And even those who are employed are barely getting by. By the time they're done paying rent and Social Security and Medicare taxes and property taxes, they got nothing left. They got nothing left. Scott, the GDP of the United States is going up about 2% a year. And everybody's happy about that because it's not negative. But inflation is greater than 2%. Well, that means we're going backwards. That means I may make 10 cents more, but what I want to buy costs 11 cents more. You see? I mean, we're in a recession. We're
not even breaking even.
We're not breaking even. That's exactly correct. And you have the media run by a bunch of idiots like Katie Couric and Tom Brokaw and Dan Rather and other liars and feeble-minded nothings. That what does it matter? You know, if I make 10 cents a year more, but it costs me 11 cents a year more to live, I'm losing. And the United States is in a recession. As long as our productivity is less than the rate of inflation, then how can we not be in a recession? We've been in a recession every year since Barack Obama's been president, and he's talking about recovery. And no one in the media catches him in the lie. Well, I mean, don't you find that just absolutely amazing?
The economy's stagnated. It is flat. And just like we were talking about the stock market, the interest rates are so low, people are just putting their money right up into the stock market and raising it up. It's a false market. If you look on the production of the companies and looking at their yield and everything, they're not stellar. I mean, the oil companies are making some money, but you look at it like H&R Block just listed. Almost all their jobs are outlanded over to India. They do all their tax reforms in India and send them back here.
Right. You call the phone and there's some guy you call. You know what? The next time you call, like anybody, any tech help or any tax help, you just ask the guy, hey, by the way, where are you talking from? You know, they're talking from somewhere over there. So, the whole situation is just a big. I mean, it's just a big fraud. It's just a big fraud. We are in a recession. We've been in a continuous recession for 7 years, and but you know, in Spain, 25% of the population is unemployed. 25%, but there they are watching their soccer games. There they are in the street watching their useless soccer teams. 25% unemployment. I mean, people. Look, people lived in the Middle Ages. You know, they can live today. They don't need that much. As long as the next guy is as poor as they are, then they're satisfied. Okay. There's this old Russian fable, and it's two poverty-stricken peasants going down a dirt road. One has a goat, the other one doesn't. They're walking down the road. One peasant sees on the side of the road a shiny object, goes over to the shiny object, and when he picks it up, a genie comes out. And the genie says, thank you for releasing me from my bondage and my incarceration. And I am so grateful for you for freeing me from my prison that I will grant you any wish that you want. Now, remember, these guys are poverty-stricken. They have nothing. They're dirt farmers. They got torn clothes. They have barely enough to eat, and they're starved, and they have nothing. And so here's one of these Russian peasants that's being offered. He's being offered anything that he wants. And what does he ask for? And this is, I'm not making this up. This is a true Russian fable. And he says, I want my friend's goat to die. That's human psychology. Most human beings, you got bad health care? That's okay. As long as the guy next door has bad health care, that's fine. You got a crummy automobile? That's okay. As long as the guy next door doesn't have a better one. I would much rather that my friend next door have a bad automobile than me have a good one. And that's the way most people are. They're much more envious of what other people have than they are in trying to achieve something for themselves. Anything else?
Yeah, that's all caused by the public school system and our federal government. That's the way they want it. And if you go back to what you were saying, 51-49, I think it's right now more like 55-45 since Barack Obama's been in his second term.
Well,
that rate's gone up to 55 on government entitlements and 45 outdoor working.
No,
That's the problem. Most people don't want to work nowadays. But who can we thank? Public school system and the federal government. Bottom line.
That's right. Okay, Scott, thanks for calling. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Leave your address.
I will. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, bye. Now we have John calling from somewhere. Thanks for calling, John. 7 at KURV. What's your comment?
Well, it's the same thing. The Democrats have always promised you the moon, and
no, the Democrats have always promised you green cheese.
You're all right, green cheese, whatever.
Okay.
And everything is going to be taken care of by the government. Social Security, unemployment, you name it.
That's communism. That's communism, right? That's communism.
Right.
Okay.
So we have a communist, fascist government.
Yes, we do.
In control of everything from the day we are born until the day we die. And we fought the Revolutionary War. Why? Because of taxes, stamp tax, and what have you.
Yes, that's true. And we're back where we started from.
Yes. We're right back on square one.
Yep. You're absolutely right.
So
you're right.
Here we are again.
Here we are again. But that's the nature of man and the nature of the world and the nature of government. And the Founding Fathers thought that they had protected us from that, but they didn't count on the venality and criminality of your average politician. Anything else?
No, that's about it.
Okay. Well, thanks for calling. And let's get this one more call in, I guess, before the break. 7 KRV. Jimmy, thanks for calling. What's your comment?
My comment is the subject of ethanol.
Okay.
Actually, we don't need ethanol.
No, we don't.
We've got more gas and oil in the state of Texas than they do in Saudi Arabia.
That's true.
And I remember the Railroad Commission. That was kind of a joke, because all that did is keep the oil people from pumping oil.
Okay.
So we could do away with ethanol, and gasoline would be $1 cheaper a gallon.
Well, you know, Jimmy, that Barack Obama, if you go to the gas station now, it used to be a few years ago, you had an option of having a mixture of ethanol, gasoline, or just pure gasoline. Now you no longer have that option. Every gallon of gasoline in Texas now has ethanol in it by federal order. And so when the American people, that's what the government is. The government is a dictator. The government's a dictator. I don't want ethanol mixed with my gasoline. I don't want it. I have no option anymore because the federal government made that edict. And why? To benefit the ethanol manufacturers and the large agricultural interests that sell corn for the making of ethanol. It's all a scam. Okay, thanks for calling. Have to go into this break. 7 KRV Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone. Back after this short commercial break. 1-800-580-8255. 1-800-580-TALK. 710 KRV Talkback. Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the on microphone. Streaming live on KURV.com. 1-800-580-8255. 1-800-580-TALK. Shut down the government. Sounds good to me. You want to shut down? Okay, let's talk about this. Let's just say by shutting down the government, they can no longer collect taxes. Maybe then, that doesn't sound so bad anymore. Let's say by shutting down the government, they can no longer collect sales tax, property tax, income tax, Social Security, or anything else. No more. Sounds pretty good to me. What else if you shut down the government? We can't go be bombing Syria. We can't be sending troops off to Iraq. We can't have our troops in 150 countries of the world. And I think the best part about shutting down the government would be to stop paying those jerks, congressmen and senators in Washington, D.C. Now, if you presented it that way, maybe it doesn't sound quite so bad. I remember I went to Grand Canyon. It was during one of these government shutdowns, during the Reagan era. And you know what? I couldn't go into the Grand Canyon. You know why? Because the Grand Canyon packed up and closed because of the government? No. It's because there was no ticket taker. So there was a federal, okay? So there was no ticket taker there. I couldn't go into the Grand Canyon was closed. Do you believe that? That's the government. All right, what do we have here? We have Raul. Raul? Yes. Raul, 7 and KRV. Thanks for calling. Hello? You there?
I haven't talked to you for a while, so I decided to call you.
Go ahead, thanks. What's up?
I want to talk about the Christian massacre in Kenya in the mall.
Okay.
All the Muslims were allowed a free pass out.
Yeah.
And Kenya is a Christian country, and so, I mean, they're attacking Christians all over the Middle East. Now they're spreading into Africa.
Yeah.
And the world is saying that the United States is Al Qaeda because we're supporting Al Qaeda.
Yeah.
And Al Shabaab was a part of Al Qaeda.
Yeah.
And so, where are we? Are we freedom fighters or are we terrorists? I mean, not according to what the propaganda coming out of Washington, but just from a lot of news reports about, starting with the Muslim Brotherhoods and all that.
I don't even know how that ended. It disappeared from the news. Usually Muslim terrorism gets taken off the news pretty quickly. How did that end anyway? The last I heard was they had all these dead...
They said the government blew up the entire structure and just collapsed it on the terrorists, and that there could be about 170 more hostages, Christians, in other words.
That's what happened?
But it was well, yeah, that's what the news is saying. So, again, are we a terrorist nation supporting the terrorists? From what world opinion is, or the propaganda coming out of Washington? I mean, I'm ashamed if the world is pointing the finger at us, knowing that we're a Christian nation. That's why everybody comes from around the world, comes to America, because once you get here, we protect you, we don't hurt you, and you have a chance to live in peace. But what is our government doing?
If you remember, Barack Obama, when he was president, when he's in his early days, said we are one of the largest Muslim nations in the world, which shows you his level of ignorance. You'll also remember that Barack Obama prostrated himself before the Saudi Arabian emir or whatever, which was a gut reaction. Barack Obama is a fascist and an Islamist. The fact of the matter is, this is a fascist nation, and our president is an Islamist. And so he's going to support Hamas and Hezbollah and Al-Fatah and Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda. I mean, he's an Islamist. Our president is a terrorist and behaves like a terrorist. That's why he's going. Why is he going after Syria? He's going after the Syrian government because the Syrian government is a non-sectarian. Okay, it's not an Islamic regime. Who's trying to overthrow the Assad? Islamists. So that's why Barack Obama supports them. Why doesn't he go after North Korea? He's talking about oppression of people. Why doesn't he go after the North Korean government? So our president is Islamist. He's a low-life Islamist, and And we are a terrorist nation. For all practical purposes, we are a terrorist nation. What is a terrorist nation? So that's because we are a statist regime, and we have uniforms on our soldiers. Doesn't mean that they don't act as terrorists. We're out there creating terrorist acts, no different than any of these other Islamic terrorists. I do find it interesting that our government doesn't say anything when Christians are killed. Says nothing at all.
Right.
Anything else?
Yeah. I introduced myself to you when you went to speak on 4th and Lark at that church there.
Okay.
And I would like one of your books, too, if that's possible.
Yeah. Just leave your address with. It'll be a couple weeks, but I'll mail one out to you. Just leave it with Joe. Okay? All right.
Thank you, Dr. Gelman. Keep up the good work, sir.
Thanks for calling. Now we have Edward, 7 KRV. Thanks for calling.
Yes, Dr. Gelman.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just pulling on over so I can talk to you a little bit safer. I wanted to talk to you about some of the comments that were made about the Postal Service.
Okay.
I'm a rural letter carrier out of Mission.
Okay.
And I'm also a Texas trustee for our state board and as well as our legislative representative. Back in 2006, the Postal Service was doing so well. First of all, we don't take any tax money from the public. In 2006, the Postal Service was doing so well and actually making money that somebody in Congress decided, you know what, we need to fund the retirement for postal employees for 75 years in advance, and let's do it within 10 years. And that's what the Postal Service was doing. We were contributing to our retirement for someone that hasn't even been born yet and doing it within 10 years. And then the financial crisis happened. And now the Postal Service is having a hard time. But we're still mandated to pay into this outrageous retirement fund that was laid on us by Congress.
Yeah, okay.
As a union, we're not allowed to strike. If there's a problem or a contractual issue going back and forth, we do what regional people do. We get our side, we get all our material together, the Postal Service gets their material together, and we go to court, and then we abide by what.
But why is there a postal union at all?
Well, postal unions, what I make down in the valley is the same amount of money as a rural carrier would make in New York City.
Okay.
At one time, there was actually a private contractor here in the valley that was delivering in Roma, and this individual actually subcontracted out to an illegal alien. When I deliver my mail,
yeah, but that's against.
I do 100% good job every single day.
Well, wait. I'm not saying anything about postal workers. They're out there doing their job. What I'm saying is, why is there? I mean, the postal service is a public service. It is run by the federal government. You're all public employees. Why is there a union? What is the reason for there to be a union? I mean, your boss is your boss is the American people.
If it were up to our bosses, we'd probably be getting paid a minimum wage.
Now, okay. Who are your boss? Your bosses are all also federal employees, and aren't they not appointed by the federal government? The Postmaster General and all that, aren't they appointed by the federal government?
The structure, technically, yes, sir, that would be correct. But postmasters are usually postal employees that work their way up to postmaster positions. Then postmaster positions are moved up on over to what they call an MPU, which is a postmaster that oversees other postmasters.
Right.
And then there's a.
But they're all public employees. Ultimately, it's the federal government that determines who works for and who doesn't work for the Postal Service. Ultimately, it's the federal government that dictates how the management of the Postal Service.
Actually, the Board of Governors of the Postal Service actually dictate how.
But these are all federal employees.
Yeah, the Postal Service is actually not a federal employee until that individual retires. Then he becomes a federal retiree. But before that, we are not federal employees.
Then you're employees of what?
You're not.
It's not a private organization. So
But we run like a private organization. We don't take any tax money. The revenues that we create is the revenues of the.
But what about the billions? Well, no, because those no. The price of a stamp is set by the federal government.
Yes, sir. It's set by the Board of Governors, and then, of course, the House, the government does vote on it. And
right. So the post office is run. I mean, if the federal government says you're not going to have Saturday postal delivery, or the federal government says we're going to hire 10,000 people or close down, it's the federal government that makes that decision.
Yes, it's also the federal government that got the postal service into this mess. In 2006.
That's true. But what I'm saying is if you're public employees, why is there a union? I mean, you only have a union to protect you from unfair employment practices. Are you saying the federal government applies unjust employment practices? That's what you're saying.
I do believe, and I've actually heard the Postmaster General make speeches to where, and you're correct, where he's only interested out for himself. He's out there to make his record look good for the next couple of years before he retires. He's there supposedly to do a job and get us back online, but nobody really cares on the long term. I guarantee you in 2016, once we finish paying this outrageous retirement system into this retirement system, which no other federal or even private company will do. No one else in this country puts into their retirement 75 years in advance within the 10-year period. In 2016, all of a sudden, wow, we just started making money. Well, we've been making money, but it's all going into this retirement fund. Thus, it looks like the Postal Service is going into the hole.
Yeah, but yes, but that money is going to retired postal workers.
Yeah,
and that retirement program is set up.
If 2016 we stop paying into this retirement account, there's enough money in this retirement account for someone that's not been born yet that decides to retire in 75 years. The FBI doesn't do this. The IRS doesn't do this. The military doesn't do this. I don't believe any private company does this. You don't fund your retirement 75 years in advance.
I get that, but remember, all these rules once again are set up by the federal government.
That's correct. Someone thought it was a good idea, thinking that, hey, look, the post office is making money, and we shouldn't be making money.
Look, all I know is that the public unions are in debt $75 trillion. Okay? All that money is being...
We're not. The Rural Letter Carriers Association, which I am part of, okay, we are not in debt. We actually have money in the bank.
The money you get is money that is from the taxpayer, from the person using your buying
service.
stamps. It's still it's just all money going to the federal government.
The federal government turns around and uses that same money to pay its employees. The IRS, what money do they generate? The military, what money do they generate?
Well, the IRS will say they generate a lot of money.
I guess they do in tax collecting, but we actually sell and produce and give a product to the public service, to the public people, while these other federal agencies do not. If we were a private company like FedEx or UPS, we'd be giving them a run for their money. Because we do exactly the same thing they do, but I truly believe we do it better. And I could tell you that for a fact that our national officers, which there are about 9 of them, from committeemen all the way to presidents, we don't own private jets. We own a 3-story building in Alexandria, Virginia, and we own 4 houses for our top president, vice president, and so on and so forth, because they need to maintain. These are still rural carriers. They still need to maintain a home back where they come from different parts of the country. And believe me, their salaries are I think the president makes something like $150,000 a year. And that's our president. That's top pay.
Right, I understand that, but as has been shown over and over again by the GSA, that the amount of money spent by these unions, public unions, by their officers is an astronomical amount of money. And they use it, and it's all hidden and concealed and protected because they're all on the inside. The bottom line is the post office loses billions of dollars a year of taxpayer money. And
I would love to talk to you in 2016, because that's when they're going to find out, oh, my God, now we're making money. It's going to be a big turnaround, because that's when we meet all our obligations towards this federal retirement system, and we're still going to be in the black for anybody coming into the postal service.
Let me just say this.
Uh-huh.
That when 2016 rolls around, what you're going to find is that the Postal Service has no money in its retirement fund. That's what you're going to find.
It's like saying, is there any money in our Social Security lockbox?
No, there's not. It's no money at all. I'm saying exactly the same thing. That's my point. It's already been stolen.
Yeah, I do believe it is, because we have been asking for that money back in order to make the post office solvent again. And, of course,
it's already been spent
because the money's not there.
It's not there. Okay. Well, first of all, in my experience, the average postal carrier has always done a superior job. We always get our mail. They're always doing their job, and that's wherever I've lived. I've never, ever had a problem. I like the postal workers. They do their job. They're friendly. They're efficient. Great. It's just that the system the federal government has set up where they're siphoning off all this money does a disservice not just to the country, but to the average postal carrier, such as yourself as well.
Yes, sir. I agree with you there.
Okay. Thanks for your call. All righty. So that's what the government does. The government steals from everybody, but turns one against the other in an attempt to diffuse or distract the American people from who the real crook is, which is the federal government and your average politician. What is the law? Have you ever thought about that? What is the law? Too many of us believe that the law is written in stone, handed down by God. But laws are made by man. If it were not so, why do laws change? Why does a law in one state differ from a law of another state? Why is the law of one country different from the law of another country? Why is the law in the United States today different than the law in the United States was 100 years ago? Why? Because laws are made by man. What is the law? Well, the definition of the law is a rule of conduct or action prescribed or formally recognized as binding or enforced by a controlling authority. What you will notice is that in the definition of law, the words morality and ethics are not there. The law is arbitrarily contrived based upon the desire of government, on the needs of government, and is enforced by government. And the law can change and does change very frequently. Now, so then we have natural law. Now, what is natural law? Well, natural law is the laws of nature. Now, you don't need a law made by man that says, obey the law of gravity. You have to obey the law of gravity whether you want to or not. Laws made by man are required in order to direct society in a certain down a certain path. So laws are created in order to get society to conform in a certain way and to prevent society from performing in a different way. So those actions which society or the government believes are good for the community or the government, then the laws are made to reward that behavior. And those human activities which are considered detrimental to society or the government, there are laws made to deter that activity through a system of punishments. So you have murder. What is murder? Murder is illegal homicide. Now, homicide does not necessarily have to be murder. You can have justifiable homicide. You can have accidental killing, okay, which is not justifiable, you might say, but is not purposeful. What is murder? Murder is a purposefully performed unlawful act. Murder, of killing somebody. Murdering somebody for something that's for an illegal reason. But who determines what's legal? And who determines what is murder? In the United States, before 1973, the killing of the undelivered infant was murder, illegal homicide. Now it's not in most cases, or many cases. The act did not change. But the defining of the act as murder versus homicide, that did change, or justifiable homicide, that did change. So what is the law? So the law is variable and is not is not based on any fixed morality and ethics. Why? Because there is no fixed morality or ethics. What some people consider good, other people consider evil, and so morality and ethics changes not only from society to society, but even within a society over time. And so what does law come down to? Ultimately, law comes down to what government thinks ought to be the way a society should behave. And in general, government creates law not to protect society, but to protect government. We have this issue of warrantless surveillance on the part of the National Security Agency, by the CIA, by the FBI, and others in the federal government that screen phone calls or other forms of communication, they say, as a deterrent to terrorist activities. Well, first, what is a terrorist activity? Define terrorism. Secondly, the Fourth Amendment specifically states that the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the places to be searched or the people and things to be seized. The government is saying that they can screen, that they're only screening calls for illicit behavior. But who defines illicit behavior? The Constitution says, by the Fourth Amendment, that before surveillance can be employed against an individual or articles or persons seized, that there has to be justification, that there has to be acts that are illegal and that are supported by, and those acts, the assertion of those acts is supported by oath or affirmation. In other words, there has to be some evidence of criminality before you can have surveillance employed. That's not what the NSA is saying. The NSA is saying, we're going to look at everything, and then we will determine if the communication is one of illegal nature or not. That is spying. That is what the government does to spy against people it doesn't like. And the people it doesn't like don't necessarily have to be doing illegal activities. In other words, individuals that don't agree with government policies, government doesn't like that. And so the government can spy against them, or the government can employ surveillance against them in order to intimidate those who oppose government. But you have all these American people and even these idiot pundits that say, well, if you've done nothing wrong, what is there to fear? If you're not doing criminal activity, what do you care if your phone conversation is listened to? Well, I don't want my phone conversation listened to. And who decides what is illegal and what is not illegal? Who knows who's listening to your conversation? Who knows if that person has a grudge against you particularly for some personal matter? and then wants to raise issues against you. Who knows what the motivations are of those listening? Those motivations may not be based upon justice, may be based upon personal things, may be based upon competitions, personal competitions, may be based upon a difference in philosophical outlook. The Constitution is very clear that there has to be evidence of criminality or some probability of criminality, of a specifically defined criminality, not a vague one, terrorist activity. I say Barack Obama should never have been reelected. Barack Obama may consider that a terrorist viewpoint. Maybe, or maybe not, or maybe someone else in the government considers that unsavory because I don't like Barack Obama because he's a fascist. Or maybe if I could talk to a friend and I say Barack Obama is a fascist, maybe that's going to be taken as by a bureaucrat as unsavory, as terroristic. I'm calling the president a fascist. And then surveillance will be launched against me and my family, delving into my private affairs. And too many in the American society think that's perfectly acceptable. Too many in American society now believe that if I call Barack Obama a fascist, I ought to be investigated. The Founding Fathers knew that the British infiltrated societies of Americans that were opposed to British activity, British aristocracy, those who were opposed to the divine right of kings. That's what government does, not to protect society, but to protect government. But see, government thinks that they are society. Government believes they are society, that society and government are the same. Government believes that government and law are the same. The king is the law. And what the king says today is the law. And what he says tomorrow, even if different from today, then that is the law. And the king and the law are the same. That's what Barack Obama believes, that Barack Obama and the law are the same. That is not true. Barack Obama is not the law, and the government is not the law. The law is the law. And in this country, the Constitution is the law, but not anymore. Now the Constitution has been discarded and tossed aside and trampled upon. Not because we live in a new age, but because the government wants to be the law arbitrarily. They want to be the complete authority arbitrarily, without any constraints, without any restrictions, in order to do what they want to do, which is what? To increase the power of government and to increase the control of the government over the American people. That is what our government wants. That is what all governments want. That is what our politicians want. That is what all politicians want. To control your life. To control you and your life. Have to go to a break. 7 KURV Talkback. Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home there on microphone. Be back after this short break. Okay, we're back. 7 KURV Talkback. Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone. 7 KURV, streaming live, KURV.com. All right, let's take this call from Sam. 7 KURV, thanks for calling.
Hey, Dr. Gelman.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Going right with what you were saying, we have something called law enforcement nowadays, but it's funny how it really should be called selective law enforcement agencies, because notice how they never really, never see them enforcing the law of the Constitution. In other words, the Bill of Rights and all that. They don't ever put. It seems like whenever they come up with a law or something, it's always, most of the time, it's anti-constitutional. So and yet they're law enforcement. But they don't. It seems like they never. It seems like I never see them really stressing that side of law enforcement, that side of the law. And the other thing, I was going to ask you, because one of the big problems that I see in society today is that, the majority of society nowadays, as we know, is totally ignorant about the Constitution, you know. And I would think that one of the things that maybe some group will start out, and I would love to volunteer, is some kind of movement to get a copy of the Constitution in every household in America, you know, because my goodness, it's just we're lost in that area, and I think that's why politicians, you know, more and more have more of a stranglehold on us, and yeah, we've gotten so far away from it.
Well, politicians thrive best in an environment of ignorance, and so you're exactly correct. One has to wonder why the Constitution is never taught in public school. I have 4 children who went through the public school for elementary, for high school and part of elementary school, and even in the private school, and they never ever learned about the Constitution, the Revolutionary War. And they talked about Korea armchairs. They never talked about the Declaration of Independence or any of that. And that is because anyone reading the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence would soon come to realize that our government is not functioning constitutionally, and certainly not functioning along the lines of the principles laid out in the Declaration of Independence. And so it is in the interest of government not to educate the people along those lines, because you're exactly correct. It would seem you would think that every school child, and every American for that matter, in fact, everybody who goes to a polling place ought to be given free a copy of the Constitution to read. You would think that. You would also think that every school would have a course every year in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. You would think that. So the fact that it doesn't happen anywhere, illustrates how far the country has deviated from the principles of the founding of the country. Anything else?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, if you happen to ever find a group or some organization that is involved with disseminating copies of the Constitution, I would love to donate to that or be part of that, because I really feel that's one of our, man, I mean, there needs to be some major movement in that direction, because the masses, you know, or as a matter of fact, the politicians are ignorant of the Constitution, because earlier on, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely correct. Any conversation with a politician on a constitutional issue, they haven't the slightest idea. Yeah. Most of them have never read it. Interestingly, you think that would be they have to take an oath to defend the Constitution, and probably none of them, or very few, have ever read the Constitution. Certainly, very few understand what it actually says.
So, if you ever happen to, in your contacts, if you ever happen to hear of a group or know of a good group that's involved with that, if you'll one of these days air it out, I'd be happy to be part of that.
Well, I think if you go online, though I don't belong to anything myself, that there is actually a party, a political party called the Constitutionalist Party, and I think there are a number of constitutional organizations that I'm sure would be happy to accept any money you want to send them, that exist in order to try to educate the people along the lines of the founding principles.
Yeah, because here locally, I know the Tea Party has had some sessions, teaching about the Constitution, but they don't get a lot. I've been to a couple of them, and there's basically silver-haired elderly people, which is fine, but the younger people, they don't go to these things, and I just think that I wish that I could find a place, not so much to try to hold these in-depth classes or anything, but at least to get them to read the Constitution, the masses out there, and I think if enough people out there read that document, it's going to affect them, some kind of way to where they at least can start questioning government power and control, and overreach. But thank you, Dr. Gelman. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your show. Keep up the good work, sir.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate your call and your comments. I guess what we might do, I would think, is that if any of us want to get on a school board, maybe a local school board, and then and just one thing only, make a requirement, in that in elementary and high schools that every student receive a copy of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and that every year they ought to be time devoted to learning the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. I would say if you get on a school board, that would be a great. They waste so much time and money on these school boards. It's all just ways of getting contracts to friends and relatives. But that would be, I think, something that would accomplish, that might accomplish something, is to require the dissemination of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence to every student in school. But I mean, that would be worth doing, I think. Anyway, so we were talking about the law and what the law is and what it's not, and the law is not necessarily morality and ethics. It is because there is no absolute morality and ethics. Maybe one day there will be proven to be morality and ethics, but the bottom line is that in the world, morals, or what's considered moral, changes from one society to the next and from year to year. And I think we can see that very, very obviously on the issue of homosexuality and same-sex marriage and how that issue and the morality of that issue seems to take on a different aspect depending upon who you're talking to. And that's one obvious example of where the ethics and morality seems to be in a state of flux. Of course, we have our viewpoints, which are based on fact, and the other side doesn't. But still, like I say, there's the abortion of the undelivered infant. There's the issues of war. There's the issues of taxes, and every one of these issues, the people try to shroud in a certain morality, and it's interesting, I think, how both sides say that they're moral. So when it comes to law, morality and ethics is really not in the equation. Here we have a call from Fernando, 7 KURV. Thanks for calling, Fernando.
Yes, Dr. Gelman.
Yeah.
The gentleman that just called previously, wanting to see how he could get involved in helping teach helping the public learn about the Constitution. The Tea Parties are trying to do that. In fact, one of them in the Harlingen area, they're trying to get a book called The 5,000-Year Leap into the high schools, which is an excellent book. It teaches 28 principles on which the Constitution was founded.
Okay.
I don't know if you've read it yourself or not, but
yeah, I have. I don't remember.
Excellent.
I guess it was just the change in attitudes from 5,000 years ago to the present day. It's taken us from the divine right of kings to our philosophy today of individual liberty.
Essentially, what it explains is, for thousands of years, there was no advancement in technology or anything, and then about the time that the Constitution was created, America became the greatest nation on the earth. In a matter of a couple of hundred years, we accomplished things that had not been done in the previous 5,000. And it attributes it to the 28 principles of liberty that were applied in the creation of the Constitution. It's an excellent book, and it gives a good understanding of not only of the Constitution, but of how it is that it was brought about. It talks about the founders and the studies that they had made, and all the knowledge that they had acquired in preparing themselves to come together and create the Constitution. In fact, it's amazing how it all came together, and you come to understand how it is that they all gave a deity credit for their ability to have accomplished what they did.
Well, yes, that's exactly correct, but it's really just a question of liberty and freedom. The great leap in humankind was, as far as knowledge, was the printing press. Why? Because that allowed the common man and woman to get access to information which was only reserved for the privileged class. There was another great leap because of the creation of the United States, because it gave the common man equal footing with anyone else. Whereas it used to be divine right of kings, you had an aristocracy, you were born into your class and you died in your class. In this country, they said, no, each person is an individual, and whose life will be determined by their individual merits, not on what their parents did, not on what country they came from, but on their own individual merits, a willingness to work and talent and all of that. And that's why the United States... Yeah, go on.
That's right. Well, one of the first books that was printed was the Bible.
I think it was the first book, actually.
Yeah, I think it was the first book that was printed. And in fact, in great volume, and people began to see and read, reading the Bible. In fact, it was the first textbook in American schools. But the people that came here with the intent of creating a society based on biblical principles. And that is why our country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles, because of that. But the people that came over here were well versed in the Bible, and that was their textbook.
Right, because
and not only did they learn religious principles from it, but that is how they came about to the phrases of nature's law. And when they're referring to deity, referring to God. But that's what made them created a society that not only was able to create the Constitution, but have the understanding necessary for them to be able to live by it. You can't today give the Constitution to any country, and most countries are not going to understand it. In fact, even the United States today, most people don't understand it. But it created a society that was capable of not only creating it, but living it. And that's what made the 5,000-year leap that is the title of that book. But it's an excellent book, and I think it should be a required text in every high school.
Right. Well, good luck with that. So, because that would, be anti-government, I think, for the most part.
It would definitely be anti today's government, but it would not be anti-constitutional. Definitely it would be very pro-constitutional.
Oh, absolutely. You're correct about that, and which brings us to the point we've been making that the Constitution and our government are not synonymous any longer. Anything else?
That's right. That's it. Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks for the information. I really appreciate it. It's always going to be a battle between the statists and the individualists. The history of the world has always been a battle between statists and individualists. In this country, the overthrow of the aristocracy by our founding fathers was a victory for the individualists. But today's government is a monument to statism. You have a president who is king and believes himself to be king. You have a Congress, which is the aristocracy, and you have the judiciary branch, which is the priestly class that believes. In the olden days, you had the priestly class, the state-run church or the state-affiliated church. You had the priestly class that interpreted the Bible according to the way the state wanted the Bible interpreted, and they did not want the people to be able to read the Bible, because then the people would know the truth of what was in the Bible rather than what the clergy was telling them. The clergy interpreted the Bible for the people. Today, the judiciary wants to interpret the Constitution for the people. And the people don't read the Constitution. They just are told what the Constitution says by the priestly class, which is the judiciary. And the judiciary knows nothing about the Constitution. The judiciary exists to promote big government and to protect big government from the people. So that's what we have today. We have a new aristocracy, the counter-revolutionary forces, and I'd like to call our government the counter-revolution, because that is what they are. Because they overthrew the revolutionary principles of the founding fathers, which was that each person was an individual born free, had natural rights, conferred by a power greater than man, not conferred by government, and that the proper role of government was not in that people should serve government, but that government should serve people. That the proper role of government was to protect and guarantee natural rights of the people. In today's world, as it had been at that time, what government considers its proper role is to control the lives of others. to control the lives of the people, to control your life and my life, because they think they're smarter than us. And anyone who was talking with a politician would soon come to realize they're not smarter than anybody. My dog is smarter than most politicians. And I'm probably insulting my dog by saying that. Politicians are basically feeble intellects. They start off, they're narcissists, which means that they already have a feeble intellect, and then they become more enfeebled over the years because they surround themselves with yes men and yes women who are always telling them how great they are. But I'm going to tell you, in my personal experience, even more obnoxious than the politician is their staffer, because they control the life of the politician. They think they're smarter than the politician. I mean, they're the most obnoxious people in the world you ever want to meet is your average staffer of a politician. They are as obnoxious as anyone can be. Most politicians become enfeebled over time because they're disconnected from realities of life. They are protected. They're put back into the womb. Everything they do is has no consequence for them. You and I, we do something, there's a consequence. Politician does something, there's no consequence. George Bush gets us, George Bush, the first King George Bush the first of Kennebunkport, or whatever they call that place in Maine. King George the first got us into Iraq. When was that? 1990? What was it? 89? 1990? Here we are, 23 years later, still mucking around, okay? He's retired, jumping out of airplanes. Sometimes he has a parachute, sometimes he forgets. So here you have George Bush jumping out of airplanes. He's fine and dandy. We're stuck with what he did. We're stuck with it. Our children are stuck with it. Then his useless son, George Bush the Lesser, King George II the Lesser, no smarter than his father, does it again. Gets us involved there again. There we are, stuck in the Middle East. These guys are off having a good old time on their ranches or riding around in boats up in Maine. The Bushes are about as much Texan as John Kennedy was a Texan. That's about how Texan they are. They're northeastern elitists. Just like Bill Clinton is no more a Southern boy than is Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi. They're all northeastern elitists. They weren't born there. They became that. It's their psychological makeup. And that's what we have. So we're stuck with these. We're stuck with what they did. We're stuck. They're off. We're stuck with it. Okay, Barack Obama will be gone mercifully. He'll be gone, unless he figures out something. He'll be gone mercifully in 3 years. And we're going to be stuck with everything that he did. The Affordable Care Act, these taxes, all the garbage that he did, we're going to be stuck with. He's going to be off skiing around with northeastern elitists, not realizing he's nothing but a useful dupe and fellow traveler that they have used for their own gain. And we're stuck with it. And our children will be stuck with it. And our grandchildren will be stuck with it, with what they did. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. Politicians should fade into time and never be remembered, because it's the Constitution. It is not Barack Obama's policy, George Bush's policy, Bill Clinton's policy, which needs to be either remembered or suffered through. They are servants of the Constitution, or are supposed to be servants of the Constitution. They are supposed to adhere to what the Constitution says. We elect our representatives to guarantee that the principles of the Constitution are maintained. I'm not interested in George Bush's personal viewpoint. I am not interested in Barack Obama's personal viewpoint. In fact, his personal viewpoint I find frightening. They are to be measured by how closely they adhere to the principles of the Constitution. And by that measure, Barack Obama and George Bush and Bill Clinton were disasters, anti-constitutionalists, anti-American. That is what they are and were. The last president to approximate what the Constitution wanted in a president or a politician was Ronald Reagan. The difference between Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama and George Bush is that Ronald Reagan knew he didn't know everything. Ronald Reagan believed in the ingenuity of the average American and the inventiveness of the average American, and that whatever problem we had could be solved if the average American was allowed to function freely and independently. And compare that to George Bush and Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, that they tell you what's best for you, that they dictate to you how you're going to run your life, that they are going to regulate your life because you haven't got the brains to regulate your own life. That's what they say. Look at the way they speak. It's what they want, what they believe, what they think, versus what Ronald Reagan said, what the American people believe, what the Constitution says, what the Founding Fathers wanted. Compare that to Barack Obama. What does he know about the Constitution or Declaration of Independence? He knows nothing of the Founding Fathers. He's nothing but an idolater. He's an idol worshiper. That's all he is, an idol worshiper. He believes in the power of government. He believes in the divine right of kings. He believes in the infallibility of your average politician. John McCain. Look at this fool, John McCain. When are the people of Arizona going to get rid of this guy? Look what he says. That the American people have spoken because they reelected Barack Obama. There are 250 million potential voters in the United States. 61 million voted for Barack Obama, 25%. And does it really matter what Barack Obama thinks? It's what the Constitution dictates. That's the way it's supposed to be. But John McCain knows so little about the founding principles that he says he thinks we're a democracy. We are not a democracy. We're supposed to be a constitutional republic whose government makes decisions based upon what the Constitution says, not on the petty personal grievances and beliefs of our feeble-minded politicians. Well, that's about it for today. I want to thank all the callers who called in and all the listeners. And we will be back next week, barring an Islamist takeover. Thanks for listening.